Hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Verhulst, a staff member at the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship and the moderator today of this panel discussion as part of the 2022 Calvin Symposium on Worship. Today, we're going to be talking about expanding models of ministry with youth for worship and congregational life. I am delighted to have three guests here with me today. Melissa Deelstra is the Christian Education Coordinator at Zion Presbyterian Church in Prince Edward Island, Canada. JohnEric Zayas is Associate Pastor at Grace and Peace Church in Chicago. And Yuli Lee is the Senior Director of Staff and Partnerships at Fuller Youth Institute. Fuller Seminary is based in Pasadena and Yulee is based in Chicago. Thank you very much for joining me today. I really look forward to our discussion. To begin, I'm going to ask you to go around the screen to introduce yourself, and we'll jump right into the first question. And that question is, how has your worshiping community, or those you serve, supported the creative ministry energy and initiative of youth, and not just the adults who lead youth programs? So if we could begin with you, Melissa, that would be great.
Hi, as you mentioned, I'm here in Prince Edward Island. I work at Zion Presbyterian Church, which has been a joy over the last 2 years. I've also had a chance to dip into working with websites and social media since COVID-19, so ministry has changed a bit over that time. And I'm also pursuing a Master's of Theological Studies at Knox College in Toronto, so I've really enjoyed that.
Wonderful. And do you want to jump right into the first question about some of the things you're doing with youth to encourage agency and things that they are able to initiate on their own? Yeah.
Because of COVID, I've been working for about 2 years, and over that time, most of our programs have ended or been on hold. And this summer, one of our young people brought a proposal to council or session and said, I would really like to get this started. So how do we do this well within COVID protocols? How do we get started, even if that's slow? And she talked about finances and budget and goals and curriculum. So we brought that forward to session, and session couldn't say yes quick enough. So they've provided her with budget, space, assistance. I'm her youth mentor. And it's just been really exciting to see a church move so quickly to support a young person. And so she's been running youth group since the beginning of October. So it's just the first steps, but it's been really exciting to see the church say yes to that.
Thank you. And let me just jump in by mentioning, as we talk about these expanding models of ministry, we're going to look at 5 sort of general values. And so that first one is, we'll talk about first is youth agency, but the others are theological questions, making space for question asking, for intergenerational community and relationships, for the roles of families and especially parents. And then the last theme I hope we can touch on is the idea of multiple pathways for youth to find their way into the life of the church. So JohnEric, let's go next to you. If you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work there at Grace and Peace, and then what you're doing around this area of youth agency.
Yeah, absolutely. I am, like you said, JohnEric. I'm an associate pastor here at Grace and Peace in Chicago, and a new father. My wife and I just had a beautiful newborn boy. His name is John Micah, and he is perfect, and we love him, and we've just been over the moon excited. But yeah, so my wife and I actually spent many years in our church working with the young people of our church. We started a youth group called The Element back in 2012, and just handed it over to 2 of our former youth who decided that they loved each other and decided to get married and they felt the call of God on their life to serve other young people as well. So we did that in the summer of 2020. Um, but one of the things as an associate pastor now we're able to do is open doors of for our young people to continue to get involved in the life of our church, and giving them agency. One thing that we, similarly to Melissa, our young people, young adults and high school age students had came to us and said, listen, we know COVID has kind of changed things up in how we're doing this, but we have an idea. And what we decided was we're going to give them all of our support to make sure that we're able to do that. And they're able to set up their group. They decided to do a virtual and in-person Bible study group that they're setting up conversations and setting up Bible studies and doing those things all by themselves. And one of the things that was the outcome of one of the things that were an outcome of the Bible study that they're putting together were some areas of concern that they had for the church, and things that they're seeing that are happening in the world, things that they see. We would love the church to be able to respond and actually speak into these things. So the Bible study that they were able to start opened up some doors, started some questions, and then those questions were then offered to us. And we were able to develop with the pastoral staff and with our young adults a healthy dialogue of what this looks like to live faithful Christian lives in today's society and in our city, with many of the different things that are happening all over the country. How do we respond to those things? So it's been the beginning of a conversation, but it's also opening up some doors for even areas of teaching from the pulpit with our church. So we've really decided we want to get our young people involved in our Sunday morning service more heavily. So that's kind of the direction that this is going. How can we give them agency and give them and empower them to be able to speak and speak to some of the issues that they are concerned about as well? So
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, JohnEric. Yulee, let's go to you next. We love to hear a little bit more about your work and your context, and then this first question.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Yuli Lee. I am Korean by my birth country and American by the country I immigrated to. I'm a skier, snowboarder by the state in which I spent all of my teenage years, which is Utah. I've worked in several different sectors, but I currently spend most of my time working for the Fuller Youth Institute as their Senior Director of Staff and Partnerships, where we really develop research-based resources for youth leaders across the country. And we also provide training for youth leaders who want to lead transformative change in and with their churches. And so we like to do all of this so that faithful young people can flourish in their churches and ultimately change our world. I'm so happy to be here with such an esteemed panel. Let's see, one of the privileges we have at the Fuller Youth Institute is we get to interact with a lot of, creative and faithful ministries across the nation. And one of these ministries we came across has a vision of a world where dignity and love tears down inequality, exclusion, and unjust systems, so that all people can flourish. And so they imagine church beyond the walls, the four walls in which we typically imagine church to take place. And so one of their first priorities is to help young people find a sense of belonging by creating an alternative family experience, as they say, from the perceived, I guess, draws or benefits of toxic communities. So a lot of the young people they interact with see or have been involved in toxic communities. And so what they do is they create these alternative family experiences and different spaces of belonging. that are separate from the toxic communities that the young people are used to, that tend to promote youth violence. And so through this alternative community of belonging, these young people have an opportunity to reconstruct their identities in Christ, and then they're actually empowered to give back to their community by thinking of their own ways to do so. So there's this really intentional external focus on influencing change in one's community to create a better future, not only for themselves, but also for others in the community. And so one of their young people, she had this great talent in art, and she was just super curious about how to enact change in her community when racial injustice became front and center during the last couple years or so. And so this young woman, like I mentioned, is very artistic, and she herself expressed a lot of her pain and grief through art. And so she really wanted to figure out a way how she could use her love of art to contribute to the collective healing of her community. And so what she did was she approached the leaders of her ministry organization, and they encouraged her to execute a beautification project in their neighborhood. And so the leaders she had been talking to, they identified a wall that she could use in their community center to begin her project. And so with the help and support of her ministry leaders, she was able to invite her friends and neighborhood influencers, and all together they created an art piece that would eventually express their collective grief during a time of great trauma for them. So I think for us, when we interact with these kinds of ministries, we definitely feel that creative energy, that young person's agency in full motion, as young people really get empowered to make a difference, not only in their own personal lives or their leadership, but also in their communities.
Thank you. It's, so interesting that it's in these times of great disruption and pain. So the twin pandemics of COVID and racial, really violence and disruption. But then these becomes these moments for the young people to really step up. And I can hear that in all your examples here of really wanting to be the change agents and wanting to respond in life-giving ways that hopefully the church can really nourish and nurture. That leads very nicely into the next theme, but please, if you have any comments to each other, I hope you'll just jump right in as soon as someone's done talking and add. But if we could talk now about what practices and spaces in your worshiping communities have you created for youth to ask questions, theological questions, or even questions of community, what's going on in our world and how do we respond to it? JohnEric, would you like to start this time?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of alluding back to the first response, our pastor of formation at Grace and Peace, his name is Preston Hogue, phenomenal man of God, just really has a heart for teaching and raising up young people in the faith. He'd been a part of this group with young adults. He said, I'm going to root myself and kind of position myself to not to lead this group or not to be the head of it, but instead to just be a resource to them, to be a library or even just a sounding board, just to hear their questions, to hear their hurts, their pains, and then just try to be pastoral in that and walk alongside them with during this journey that they're on. And one thing that has been pivotal for this group is oftentimes they have questions or have thoughts about what is happening in the world around them and don't necessarily realize that in God's design has created or given opportunity for him to respond to our pains, him to respond to the things that we're dealing with. So whether that be how the church is called to engage in society, or how we are called to be carriers or keepers of our brothers and our sisters, and how we're supposed to be loving our neighbors. So when they come up with, the struggles of racial injustice, or this in our community, a big issue is loneliness. People just feeling isolated, especially with the pandemic, but even more so, like, I don't feel like I fit in here or there. I don't feel like I have a space that I can completely call my own. When they hear that God is close to us in our times of need, that God is a very present God in our moments that we need help, and He embodies the church and brings us together to stand with each other, then it's like, oh well, so God has a solution for my loneliness. And that's been able to come out in these conversations, something that a lot of young people weren't able to really discover on their own, or they didn't hear from the pulpit, or just wasn't very evident to them as they were trying to read scripture. But in having these discussions with one another, it has really opened up doors where they're able to see things in a totally different light, and also being guided along by Pastor Preston as well. So it's been phenomenal to see these things, and then that also gives us as a preaching staff or a preaching team to see, you know what, listen, this is where our young people are at. What if we were to include them in the conversation of helping develop sermon series to speak to those things, so they do find themselves on Sunday mornings involved in their church. They do see that their heart, their needs, their desires are being met, and they find their stories on the pulpit. And that's something that we're really working to work towards as well.
Thank you. Yulee?
Yeah, thanks for that, JohnEric. That's so great. I love that you touched on the topic of belonging, because, we've done research with ministries that really have made it their number one priority to create spaces for diverse young people to feel safe, both physically and emotionally, to actually explore questions that might be on their minds. And, I think it's because these ministries, they've had, the good instincts, and then have done the research to know that many of these religious questions that young people have are connected to their experiences of pain, to their everyday challenges, doubts, and trauma that reside in our bodies. And so, creating these safe spaces become an important means to receiving questions from young people, and to really engaging them in conversations that could be productive. And so, creating safe space, meaning creating a no judgment zone where any and everybody is welcome, an open space for young people to grow in their understanding of the Jesus-centered narratives of their identity, belonging, and purpose. And so what we found that's particularly valuable about these safe spaces is that they enable leaders to broach hard topics with young people, including the questions that young people are asking. And then these spaces actually help us as youth leaders to get to know our youth and their experiences better too at the same time. And so I remember I was reflecting on this question, and I remember when I was a youth pastor many years ago, and one of the ways I made space for teenagers to talk about hard topics was by creating dialogue circles. And what those were I'd first ask about 5 teenagers to write on a piece of paper one thing they were curious about on the topic of race in America, for example, perhaps something they'd heard about or seen in the news. And then I'd ask them to place their pieces of paper on designated spots on the floor. And then I asked everyone else to sit around in circles around those pieces of paper. And then as they sat down in circles around each piece of paper, I shared some rules of engagement and said, something like, a successful dialogue circle is one where we listen, to each other, where we respect what everyone has to say. And then I asked each circle to start talking about how they felt or what they knew about the topic on their piece of paper. And so I remember feeling really scared about doing an exercise like that, because you just never know where that could lead. And it actually sounds much easier than it actually was, but what was important for me to remember, and what I wanted to share today, is that these types of safe spaces, they allow youth to describe what's important to them, and they allow them to describe their feelings and how they feel about certain topics. And so it's less of a controlled process, but more so a creatively emergent one, where we meet real human needs of teenagers, of safety and belonging. And then as they feel comfortable to ask their questions and to share how they're feeling, then we're there as caring adults to then point them to better Jesus-centered answers that satisfy the deeper longings of their hearts and souls.
Thank you. It was great, great activity. And too, I love this theme now of dialogue. So JohnEric with the sermons and talking ahead of the sermons and texts and so forth. And this example, Yulee, that's great. Melissa, how about for you and your church?
Our youth leaders, so I am the mentor to our youth leaders. Our youth leaders have recently booked a camp weekend, like a retreat. And they love getting 35 kids out to the camp. And here on PEI, there are lots of really effective camps. We have lots of campgrounds, beaches, and spaces where you can have a lot of kids out and have a really good time. And so that was a really good way for them to create a space where youth felt, belonging and fellowship, and a lot of those things that they maybe haven't been able to experience over the past year and a half. But as an employee of the church, I don't often go to retreats, but I have noticed that instead of cleaning up the Sunday school rooms after Sunday school, that time is precious, or before Sunday school. So I try to come in on Saturday and have everything ready so that when my youth leaders and my youth families come into church, I have dedicated time to ask them, how was your week? How was school? And I have been blown away by how honest they are, because we have several youth who will not go to a retreat. They're not interested in hanging out with 35 kids, and sports and games and farting games are just not their space. But if I were to ask them outside of the Sunday school room, how was college this week? How are your exams? They tell me, and their concerns, and parents feel welcome to come and talk. And I've been really surprised by just how open they've been, just by creating that very non-committal space. Nobody signs up for a conversation time. We're just there for Sunday.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder too about it's quality time, and really putting other things aside so that you can truly be present with these young people and emerging adults, and they can tell when you're when you're really listening or not. So thank you for sharing that. This next theme brings us into really what I think is becoming clear in a lot of new research. I was just reading a book by Kristen Smith, but the role of families and especially parents in the religious lives of young people, and keeping them connected to the church and in the church. So I wonder if you could share what you're doing to equip parents, but really families, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and so forth, in nurturing the faith lives of young people. And especially, I think what here, because we're at the symposium on worship, that public worship gathering, what are you doing to equip the adults, the parents, in the lives of youth? How about this time, Melissa, we'll start with you.
All right, so my experience would be primarily with Christian education, so our younger families. So we have this beautiful room, which you can barely see behind me. And instead of opening a nursery or a classroom Sunday school for our ages 4 and under. We've created a family space. So we have our service live streamed into this space, but we also have Play-Doh and coloring, and kids have their own art supplies. And at some point during the service, we roll out the blanket and we do our Bible story, and we make sure we have toys that allow the kids to play with the story we talk about that day. But the primary goal is to offer a space where families can come, and if your kid is noisy or you're having a slower day, or you just want to be doing church as a family, or when we do communion together, this is a really great space where you don't have to worry about your child running down the aisle as you wait for communion. So that has been a blessing. And it's been really great to see parents be able to spend time with other parents. And it's been a great place to leave resources out or hand out resources. And we spend an hour together watching the service together, but also worshiping and doing stories at a child age appropriate. We have many youth helpers for our service as well. So I'm hoping that we're modeling some of that intergenerational work with them.
Thanks, Melissa. JohnEric, what are you doing there at Grace and Peace for equipping parents?
Yeah, so so this is kind of an interesting question for us, because the makeup of our church is we have some young people that come to our church without their parents. We have some parents that their kids want nothing to do with church. They'll come on their own. Single parents, varying levels of engagement at our church. So when we talk about how we're engaging parents, it really is something where it's like, while we're all together, how can we highlight our young people so parents can see our young people, right? So they can see and recognize, wow, my son or my daughter has a flourishing faith life of their own. I want to figure out how I can further connect with that individual. So that's like the starting point for us. So one thing that we try to do is at Grace and Peace, we have our DNA, which is prayer, worship, and word. Those are 3 parts of our liturgy that we highlight throughout. So we'll start with prayer, start with worships, and then go into the word. But what we'll do is, on our worship team, we have one family that is actually represented with 3 different generations. So we have a grandfather, we have a mother, and we have a son that are all on the worship team worshiping together. And when we talk to our young people and show, hey, listen, well, this is how our church does it. We have all these different connection points where, yeah, your mom can come to church. So if they come to church on their own, I guess is what I'm saying. Your grandma can come, your mother can come, they can get connected. Or for that single mom or that father that doesn't have a kid that doesn't want to get involved in church, it's like we try to create a space that is very much so intergenerational by highlighting our young people and showing them this is a safe space to be. For those parents that are looking for assistance and help, we as a church have really been grown from youth group, from youth ministry. Our senior pastor was a young life leader for many years before becoming a senior pastor. And so we have lots of leaders in our church that are school counselors and worship, youth leaders or youth pastors in different seasons of their life. So we have spaces where a lot of conversation gets to be had about our young people and those experiences. So we try our best to center young people in our services and in our conversations. How can we best serve our young people? So they kind of happen. A lot of the conversations happen organically from those areas. But oftentimes in different churches, you don't even see the young people. The young people are just sit in the back row, hanging out with their friends or just not existing at all. So you kind of forget that they're there. So for us, we really said we need to highlight our young people and show the amazing gift they are to the body, and then those conversations begin kind of to happen organically. One other thing is our church actually wouldn't function without young people. Our young people is our full tech team, our technology team that was able to carry us through COVID. literally ranged from the age 9 to like 16 or 17. And they ran everything from audio to video to lighting, everything. And another awesome point is like 3/4 of them are all young women. So it's like seeing women in technology just rocking it. And our church would not survive without our young people. So as we were starting to come back to service and people were starting to come back into the building, we made sure to highlight and recognize, hey, these are the young people that have been able to sustain our church through this tumultuous time. So we celebrated them as well. So we try to highlight young people as much as we can at our church, because that's kind of where we all come from. So
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, JohnEric. And two, it's a reminder that for any given worshiping community, there might be others who step into roles, adult mentorship type roles, and that's so important and significant too.
Yeah.
Great, Yulee.
Yeah, this question, I think, was one of the most difficult questions to answer for me, because equipping parents and guardians or aunties and uncles, grandmas, etc., looks so different depending on the ethnic community in which we serve. And also, JohnEric was alluding to this, but we can't assume that young people have living parents or able parents and or parents who are present in the everyday lives of young people. And so along with that, to top it all off, there's really no roadmap we can give to every guardian that tells them, for example, quote, like, here's what to do next when your child turns 16, for example. So I'm going to speak from my own cultural context. While I don't speak for all Asian Americans, I'll say from my own personal experience as a leader and former youth leader is that language, cultural differences, and migration realities are just some of the underlying challenges for Asian American families. And in the middle of all of that are young people themselves living as Asian and American, straddling the values and differences of just two very different worlds. For example, when I was growing up, I had to help my parents write letters in English to their lawyer. And this is when I was little, or translate for them at the bank, etc. This was all before I could even open my own bank account and such. And so these are really big responsibilities for young people to carry. Also, many Asian family systems are hierarchical and patriarchal. So parents often tell young people what to do and what not to do, or even like what to say or what not to say. And these dynamics, they can result in many young people's struggles, as teenagers, as they desire more freedom and autonomy, while also wanting to please their elders at the same time. So there's a lot of tension there and challenges for Asian American young people. And then on top of all that, Asian American youth, as you all know, they continue to face anti-Asian racism that has skyrocketed during COVID. And this anti-Asian racism is also what their parents have faced, but they don't talk about much because we come from a shame-based culture. So there's some topics that you just don't talk about because it's just so shameful. So I think, given all of that, I think equipping Asian American parents begins with awareness of everyday lived experiences of our Asian American young people and what they face, and then creating connection points for Asian American parents or adults to have more informed and honest conversations with young people that integrates faith with their identity, belonging, and purpose in our world. So recently, we just tried a small experiment at my home church here in Illinois. I'm not the youth pastor, but I serve in our youth ministry. And our youth pastor decided to invite our parents, our Asian American parents, we're in predominantly Asian American church, to youth group one Friday evening. And this Friday evening was handed over to the youth to vision cast and develop the experience that they wanted their parents to have that evening. So the parents could really understand what was on the hearts of their young people, and what their young people are passionate about. And so that evening, we created some time and space for youth and parents to pray over one another. Now that sounds really simple, but it's really awkward. It's really awkward if you're not used to having these interactions in the home with your family. So we prepared for that, and we had our young people write down their prayers for their parents, so that they can read their prayers over their parents that evening. And then the parents could respond in, a verbal prayer in the moment over their young people. But it was such a blessing time for our Asian American families to come together in such a way where Asian American parents could get a glimpse into what their young people are passionate about. And then, they can also have these intimate relational moments of prayer with their young people as well. And so those are some of the small but powerful ways we're trying to equip some of our Asian American parents in our church.
Thank you so much. It's such an important reminder about the cultural, ethnic context of any of our churches, communities, and that all those factors that come into play, that's so important. You've each touched on this, but let's go deeper into what are some life-giving intergenerational practices that you have in your communities, and especially, again, if we could keep, as you're able to bring it back to that public worship gathering. And I too welcome more discussion on the cultural context too you find each of your communities in. So maybe Yulee, can I bring it right back to you and take us more into this intergenerational community?
Yeah, for sure. Well, for this question, I'm going to talk about another wonderful ministry that the Fuller Youth Institute had the privilege of learning about. As an organization that's research focused, through our research, we do a lot of listening to and listening with the people we hope to serve. And that's, a message we give when we coach and train leaders across the nation. It's one of the first things we encourage leaders to do is listen to your stakeholders. And in fact, a professor at Fuller Seminary always says leadership begins with listening. And so, I think listening can be one of the most pastoral moves we make that transforms the communities in which we live and serve. And I say that because two leaders we've come across who we've worked with, while they were both still in college, they noticed a discrepancy between what they were seeing in the institutional church and what they were experiencing while reading the Gospels and reading about Jesus going from town to town, meeting and engaging with people. So what they did was they literally walked up and down the streets of surrounding neighborhoods, and they asked the kids and neighbors what change they wanted to see happen in their neighborhoods. And through their listening sessions with these neighbors and kids, these college students, they launched an after-school program for the kids in that neighborhood because that's what they heard they wanted. And then through subsequent listening sessions, they added a teenage program, they added a gang intervention mentorship program, and then they saw the need for some more spiritual nourishment. So they started an alpha course. And it seems, like a hodgepodge of things at first when you're listening to this story, but it's really honoring the community and what the community thinks they need. And so this all eventually morphed into a youth church. that gathered and combined two traditionally rival neighborhoods together through this new youth church that formed, which is very, very exciting. And here's where it gets even more intergenerational. So moms in this neighborhood started to get really interested in the change that was happening amongst their kids. And so when the school district unfortunately cut summer school indefinitely because of funding, a group of moms mobilized and launched their own summer school for the youth in their neighborhood to teach them about their Mexican culture and heritage and take them on meaningful field trips. And so we thought that was such a beautiful result of, God using two college students' curiosity and desire to live out the gospel to influence intergenerational ways of being that were really transformational in communities larger than their immediate ones in their immediate church contexts. And I know it's not like a story that takes place in one church, but I think it showcases the power of intergenerational ministry that extends beyond our church walls and can transform communities and neighborhoods and eventually the world. And so that's the story that I wanted to highlight for us today.
Thank you so much. Melissa, can we go to you next?
Yeah, I think we need to do a youth night or a youth parent night here, Yulee, and that next idea sounds really good too. So I think I need to take some notes after this. Here at Zion, we're a larger Presbyterian church downtown Charlottetown. So there's a lot of Scottish folks and a lot of mix. So there's a lot of people from around the world who are attracted to living in PEI, especially during the COVID pandemic. This has been a relatively safe place to live. We've just closed down the borders or there are checkpoints. So we've seen an increase in different kinds of people from different places. So the downtown is a really great place to be. In terms of our gathering worship community on Sunday morning, we have kids involved in everything, whether that's young people or kids. We have kids in their own cantabile choir. We have, like JohnEric mentioned, I think our audio and video team would not function without our young people. Some of our young people have even complained that they've been added to the coffee list before COVID because it was time they also joined the coffee list after they did choir and taught Sunday school and went to youth group. So I think if anything, they are being asked in many, many ways to participate, and our youth feel very confident in their role as essential at Zion. They know that there are many things that could not happen without them. We also start the first 15 minutes of our service with everyone. So Sunday school begins quarter way through the service, maybe midway, depending upon the order of worship. But everyone worships together at first, even when that's complicated with cohorts. We try to make that our priority. So the first 15 minutes is a little noisy, a little wiggly, and then we separate into our different age groups and family groups.
Thanks so much, Melissa. JohnEric.
Yeah, I think for Grace and Peace and our context, well, a little bit of background. We are in the North Austin community, which is a traditionally African-American community that borders a traditionally Latino community, which is Belmont-Cragen. And we're kind of like right where those two communities mix. And there's a lot of overlap now, and the neighborhood is changing a bit. So we're starting to see these two communities come together. So that's kind of the ethnic demographic that our church sits in. But many of the Latinos that are in our area are Puerto Rican, Mexican, and Central American are usually first, second generation, and Puerto Rican is usually second or third generation. Like myself, I'm third generation Puerto Rican. So there's a lot of similarities and a lot of connection points that our communities actually do have, but because there's not much connection with our communities, Chicago is still a very segregated city, but there's not a lot of connection points that we do have. But when we do get together, we find out that there's a lot of similarities. So one thing that our church had really been working on doing outside of the Sunday morning service that actually translates into is finding points where our people can get together, they can fellowship, they can eat a meal together, they can share their cultural dishes, they can listen to music and hang out. So one thing we did a couple summers ago, what was it, 2 summers ago? We did church-wide and community-wide fun nights, just hangout nights. One night we did a decades night where we actually just represented the decade from which you like grew up. You were able to self-identify if you're a child of the 70s or 80s or 60s, whichever. You would then dress up and you would be able to kind of connect. So we had a DJ and we played music, and we were able to see some of our neighborhood's grandmas just get down and cut a rug on the dance floor, and it was incredible. And our teenagers and our other young adult, like millennials, were able to see our elders and just see them living like their best life. It was just incredible. And then there became an affinity, there became a connection. So there's a beautiful young lady who's in our church. She's one of the elders of our community, where now everybody knows this individual and just feels like the neighborhood grandma, feels like someone you want to connect to, recognizing that, yes, some of our kids and our young adults come from single family homes or don't have that grandmother figure, but feel connected to, we'll call her Miss Johnson. Miss Johnson, they feel connected to her. But then now it's like that's a coveted kind of position in somebody's life. So everybody now wants to be able to be that grandma or grandpa figure. So there's a lot of unity and a lot of connection and conversations that are happening intergenerationally that happen outside of the Sunday service because of the efforts that we've made to develop community that now translate into the Sunday service. So we have, adults in our church that see our young people serving, and they've had that connection point outside of Sunday, and now are able to say, wow, young person, you are doing phenomenal. Like, keep up the good work. I see you on the camera, or I see you praying. Man, it's so good to hear young people pray and you leading us in that time. And that develops such a great opportunity for intergenerational worship and conversations about faith and about the Lord. But it started with community. It started with some things that maybe happen outside of the Sunday service. And we know that that's not something that we do often or whatnot, but it's a good starting point. And that helped develop the culture where now somebody new coming in just recognizes, hey, young people, older people, they have conversations. They can sit at a table and enjoy either a cup of coffee or some snacks or whatnot together. And that's not something outside of the norm. So that's kind of helped develop our culture as a church.
Amen. I love hearing you say young people leading us in prayer. That's wonderful. So important. We're nearing the end of our time, so we're going to just take this last theme, and you've already really touched on it in so many different examples, but it's this idea of multiple pathways for youth into the life of the church. So I wonder if you would be willing to share one example from each of you from your communities of something that perhaps might be a little countercultural or surprising, an area in which you see youth leadership in any aspect of your church life that really, brings joy to your community, but might be surprising for those of folks listening to the conversation today. So how about Melissa? We'll start with you and then go to Yulee.
I couldn't come up with a great answer to this one, so I reached out to our youth leader, and he gave me a really great example, which I really love. He's been involved in camps. Camps, like I mentioned, is a big deal here on the island, and he's worked with several of the camps on the island. And something they do really well is incorporate young people, even like starting at 11, 12, 13, into the leadership of their camps. So my oldest will be turning 12 in March, And this summer, she will begin leadership in training at one of the camps here on the island. And that means she will attend some training periods, some prayer time, and they have their own specific camp week. But throughout the summer, she has the opportunity to serve, and she is extremely excited about serving in a leadership role at age 12. And that develops until they become junior cabin leaders, I believe. And then eventually they have the opportunity to be hired as a camp counselor. But I love this notion of providing a safe place for young people to lead. And they know they have a large responsibility and role within camp. And it's a great space for them to practice some of those leadership and service skills. And I'm really excited for one of my children to begin in that type of role.
Thank you. Yulee?
That's so awesome, Melissa. So exciting for your daughter. Yeah, we know a youth leader, so committed to her church, and she's always thinking about new pathways for young people to be engaged. And what I love about this youth leader is that she's always listening to her young people and the needs that they have and what they would like to see in her church. And so that has really given her some really great data in order to create new pathways for engagement for young people. And so she actually created a new ministry model for her whole church. And really the paradigm of thinking for her ministry model was to truly have young people be the creators and not just the consumers. So that's like her tagline, to have young people be the creators and not just consumers. And so as a result of her listening and, some of what happened through her new ministry approach was that she was able to experiment outside the typical models for youth ministry. And so she was able to, for example, have students organize cooking classes at her church for other members of her church and her community. They were able to entirely lead on their own a community basket drive and make donations to different nonprofit organizations in their community. But what really stood out to me was the young people in her church, and thanks also to her senior leadership, who is really open to change and also to prioritizing young people's agency in the church. So what was really unique was that in their church's annual leadership meeting, they invited young people to attend that meeting and to speak into the future of the church. So young people offered amendments to their mission statements, and they offered ideas for how to engage their church community better. And so I thought that was really unique amongst the other ideas that took place at her church, because I don't really hear that much. I think it feels threatening to a lot of senior leaders to have young people in the room with them at those higher level meetings, because either they don't have time for that, or they don't really know how to engage young people in those kinds of conversations, and they don't know if young people can engage at that level, but they totally can. And so she experienced so much success in inviting young people into those higher level leadership meetings in her church. And that's really just transformed the young people and their whole church community, because now, their church community is an environment where young people's faith is thriving more than before. And it's all because of their church's openness to be welcoming to young people and to invite them in, not just to sit at the table, but to co-create tables together.
Beautiful, thank you. JohnEric?
So again, one of the big things that we've really tried hard to do is center young people in our service and make sure that they are seen. And one thing that this has been over the course of many years, our church has done this. I actually being a product of that, being a part of my church since I was a very young child, being able to, given the first opportunity to preach on a Sunday morning when I was just 19 years old, still in college, not, finished seminary or didn't have my degree yet, but I was able to tag team preach with our senior pastor, one of the senior pastors at the time. And that was very formative for me to be trusted with that platform. I mentioned before that our youth leaders now actually were youth in the youth ministry, and giving them the space and training and empowerment to actually lead that ministry. And then this summer, we were able to have a pastoral intern who was a young woman who's been a part of our youth ministry for many years, who is going to school at North Park right now for pastoral ministry. And we're able to see, because we open up doors and because we create space for them to lead and use their voice and share and speak to the leadership teams and whatnot, they feel like, oh, I can actually step into that role one day. Like one day this might be available to me. And I want to get involved. I want to go deeper. I want to connect more. So it may start off in the tech team where they're, manning a camera or helping out in, with the slideshow or whatnot. But that beginning point then says, well, actually, could you also help here? We really need your leadership here. Well, I don't know about this thing. Well, we can teach you that, but we really need your leadership. And then hearing that vote of confidence in them is just transformative for a young person, especially in my neighborhood where oftentimes those young people our school budgets are being cut and programs are being cut, and they feel like they're getting continually put on the back burner. For someone to say, I believe in you and I know you can do it, is just life-changing for them. So that's where that is. And I think walking with those young people, Yulee, you said that some of the senior leadership didn't know if some of the young people in that church could handle being in these higher level discussions or higher level conversations. I echo 100%, they totally can, because we've seen it too, where our young people are invited to tables that are seemingly above, but then they say something that is like, wait, why aren't we doing this? That is totally right. Like they have a better handle on this than we do. And even if they do need training, taking the time to sit with them and walk with them over and extend, I'm committed to you, young person. I'm committed to having this discussion. So with our prayer team, we have a group of people that get together consistently throughout the week, and then also on Sunday mornings. If there's any kind of prayer ministry required or needed, they are ready and willing to go. They are constantly sitting with our young people and asking them, hey, come with us and pray. Come with us. Well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to read the Bible. Or, well, I can show you. Just show me that you want to be here and I can commit to you. And we've seen our young people grow in that. And I'm not saying we have 15, 20 young people on our prayer team, but one by one, you start to see that grow. And then other young people say, oh, wait, this space is available to me too. Yeah, I want to get in that. I want to connect to that. Oh, Miss Johnson's in that group. Okay, maybe I can go hang out with her a little bit, So those are spaces that as a church, we have to continue to make our time available to our young people and commit to them and believe in them. I know those sound cliche, but if we really did the work, because it's consistent work. Sometimes we're like, well, we're on a time schedule. We need to get this thing done quickly. But if we commit to our young people, then they're going to commit to God's church and they're going to continue the life of the church. So we have to start earlier. We can't wait till they're done with college and then say, hey, come on staff, and then we can commit to you. Now we need to be starting when they're in middle school and showing them that you are fully needed in the life of the church in every aspect. And when we do that, our church will flourish.
Thank you, JohnEric. This has been such an encouraging and rich conversation about expanding models of ministry with youth. And so as we close out, I just want to ask for a final word of wisdom to those who are listening, whether they're pastors, youth group leaders, or even youth themselves listening to you all talk. What would you like to share as just a word of blessing or encouragement now as we close out our time together? And why don't, JohnEric will start with you, Yulee, and then end with Melissa.
Regardless of whatever the statistics might say or whatnot, the future of the church is bright because our young people are able to take over and do what we need to do and take us so far beyond where we're at right now. If we would just trust them and we would commit to them. So young people, if you are hearing, if you are listening and you are a part of this conversation, we trust you and you can do this. We need you. So please lean in.
Thank you.
Thanks, JohnEric. Well, I always like to say, you know, people don't want to follow you into the future. They want to co-create the future with you. So I would encourage youth leaders and leaders in general to get a team around you, include young people on your team, and leverage the power that already exists in each member of the body of Christ to co-create a new congregational culture. Where, you know, as John 10:10 reminds us, young people can experience the abundant life of Jesus and have it to the full. So I encourage us to go into the future co-creating it with young people in front of us and us following them.
Thank you.
I would like to add that it's important that we communicate to youth that they have value as a child of God. They belong to the family of God, to the church of God, regardless of how they contribute or don't contribute. They have full belonging, full value and a place here. And we are all blessed to do ministry with them.
Thank you so much, Melissa, Yulee, JohnEric. It's been a delight to have this conversation with you. And thanks to all of you for watching. Bye-bye.